I am Kaushik Ganguly, and I am very happy to welcome Arnab Ray. Arnab is one of India's most popular bloggers, and he's the author of 6 novels. He is a podcaster, he's a weekly columnist in Times of India. He's a director of cybersecurity and a PhD in computer science. Arnab, how do you find the time to do all of this?
I think I have to take time away from somewhere, and that usually comes at the cost of having a social life. So I don't have any friends in real life. Most of my friendships are online and on Twitter, which kind of shows how ephemeral they are. So that's where I make time. Obviously, as you know, with family and with increasing responsibility at work, my blogging, for instance, I don't blog as frequently as I used to. So some things have given way. So I've had to prioritize some of the things I've want to do. But so far, I've been fortunate enough to be able to juggle all these balls in the air.
Arnab, I understand that when you were 7 years old, you had a red diary in which you started writing. Do you remember the first story which you ever wrote, maybe in school?
So the Red Diary, there were it again. It was like blogging in the old days when blogging was started as a personal diary. It was not about opinions, it's about what I did today. So I do remember the first two. One was a one liner, and all of it was written in Bengali. I went to a Shubinoy Roy concert, who
Okay,
was a very famous Bengali Rabindrasangit singer in those days.
all right.
Younger listeners might not recognize his name, but Shubinoy Roy and Shantidev Ghosh. So I went to one of the concerts. My parents took me there, so I wrote that. The other thing that I wrote was my grandmother sewing my father a sweater, and all
Okay,
it said, my grandmother sewed my father a sweater. My father said thank you. That was it.
wow. When you were 11 or 12, did you write a spy thriller kind of story?
Yes, so that was unfinished. So I started writing. So from the Red Diary, I graduated to a Green Diary, which was a much bigger book.
All right.
It was thick.
Okay,
So the diary had like several of my initial forays into writing a novel. So I started writing one of the novel ideas that I had, which again I couldn't finish any of those. One was a spy thriller where the Russians attack the
yes,
US. There was
yes,
a nuclear holocaust. There was like nuclear
yes,
bombs were raining on Washington D.C.
yes.
And there was another one which I think was the better one in retrospect.
Okay,
It was the perspective of a Spanish conquistador coming to the US for the first time. So I had spent some of my years in the US,
okay,
and that was part of history. They
okay,
made us learn conquistadors and like
right.
how how they first came to the US. So I had an interest in that. I mean, it would otherwise seem strange why I would choose that topic of all things. That was the reason why I did that. And it was like written as days in the diary of someone who's on a ship and who's coming to a place where the person doesn't even know whether he will ever see land.
Right.
So, uh, so this was, again, when I said I'd written a part of the novel, I mean, I'd written 20 pages.
Okay.
So it was but those were the two things I definitely remember writing, and they were much more substantial than my Red Diary.
So when did you realize that you could write well? And when did you, understand that you wanted to be a published writer?
So, I, in comparison to my contemporaries, I was always more into reading books
Right.
and writing than most of my friends. Um, I mean, my friends were more athletic than I was. They spent more time actually playing cricket and
All
football.
right. All right.
Watched I watched cricket more than I played it. That
Okay.
was because innate lack of talent. Football I couldn't dribble. So I read a lot of books, and the thing what happens is when you're young, if you read 5 books, you think, well, what's big about this? I can write this also. So I always felt that I could write. The first time my writing was, well, the first full length novel. Again, when I say novel, this was be 80 pages full scap. They just was if I had the copy, if I think it has been lost to time
Okay.
for various reasons. It was about, it was a school romance. I
All
was in
right.
high school. I'd written
Okay.
a high school. It had been popular. I'm telling you, it was like pre Durjoy Datta stuff.
Wow.
So it, the story was, the name of the novel was Twists and Turns,
Mhm.
and that I remember. And Twists and Turns, which kind of would go on to define my writing in the years to come, because all of my books have twists and turns. That was about, it was again written from a first person perspective. It was about a kid in class 12,
Okay.
obviously me,
Okay.
trying to organize a freshers welcome, and what happened. So in the end, he loses all his friends and he loses the girl. So it ends terribly for him, and he gets called to the principal's office. So and that kind of, so there were two things in that novel, I'll use air quotes,
Mhm.
that went define the way I write. One was it had a lot of twists and turns. Second is it started kind of similar to the place it ended, in the same place where it started, and the
Okay.
principal's office.
Okay.
So so it has that notion of circularity, which for those of you who've read my books, many of them do
Yeah.
have that.
Yeah.
And the third thing, and for those of you who have read Mihiyab starts in the exact same way as the first book starts. And that was done in where I said, I hate being put in the middle of a novel
Right.
where they remember you're something even after you've forgotten my name,
Right.
and who you are, where you are. So I want to start off in a very simple way. So that was exactly the way that novel started.
Wow. Wow. Great. Great.
So that novel, so your question was, when did I first realize that I wanted to write or I could write? So that novel I showed to a friend of mine. And well, I wanted to show to many friends of mine, but nobody wanted to read. There was only one person who read it,
Mhm.
and he read it. And in those days, it was very difficult for someone to get published. The only published authors we knew who were Indian were was Ubamanu Chatterjee and Amitav Ghosh. They had written their first novels in those days. So she read the book and she said, "You're going to become a published author one day. I
Wow.
can guarantee."
Wow.
So it was the first time. I mean, I obviously didn't take her seriously, but nobody had said that to me. I mean, parents and grandparents do say that, but we
Right.
we know that. But for a friend to say that was a big validation. And the first time again, when I was in first year, this was very soon after I'd written that novel. Actually, I won two back-to-back competitions in the Telegraph. They had organized a competition on. It was a creative writing competition, so they gave the topics. So the topic that I came second, I got second prize in both of them, which was
Okay.
good. One was about Ganesha drinking milk.
Okay.
So they
Yes.
had
Yes. Yes.
got up on what do you think happened.
Mm.
That started the other strain of my writing, which was humor writing,
Mhm.
the conversation between me and somebody known as the Big G. That was all it said. The Big G and I. That's it.
Okay. Okay.
And then there was the second topic was also started a thread that I would come to take on as my own, which was a political topic.
Okay.
It was a Hitchens had called Mother Teresa and Agent of the Devil or something.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
But it was in Kolkata to call Mother Teresa that
Yes.
was pretty sensational in those days.
Yes. Yes.
They had so it was like your opinion on that. So I started writing politics, kind of politics, religion on one hand, and it both of them won the second prize. And for those days, it was a huge prize. It was 4 air tickets, return tickets to Jaipur
Mm.
on Damani, no
Wow.
longer.
Huh.
So my parents to Jaipur when I was
Wow.
first year in college
Mm.
writing. So this was the first time I got a commercial basis for my writing.
Okay.
So again, first time somebody said I could be published, and first time I got paid for it.
Wow. Wow. Arnab, I will give you a date and you have to tell me what that date means to you. That date is 20th of August 2004.
So 20th of August 2004 was the first time I started writing a blog on greatbong.blogspot.com. In those days, it was
Yes.
not Greatbong,
Yes.
uh, because it was Google had since discontinued a free blogging service. It was
Okay.
called Blogger,
Okay.
and all the blogs came out as yourname.blogspot.com. Again,
Yes.
for
Yes. Yes.
younger listening to this who have no idea what I'm talking about, this was 2004. And what had happened was I had just graduated with my PhD. I used to stay in an apartment with five other Indians.
Okay.
So our always full of conversation and the kind of banter that you encounter on social media. And when I say banter, I don't mean friendly banter. Stuff like, are Bengalis better than other Indians? Things like that.
Okay.
Are we just better? So there would be like pitched debates.
Right.
Um, there. So I stayed in that apartment for 5 years, and then I went to Detroit for my first job. So the first time I was living totally alone in a very cold place. I knew nobody there. So I was missing that conversation, and there was obviously no Twitter in those days to
Right.
go and pick up random strangers.
Right.
So that's when I started writing this blog. And of course, I had no idea that it would take off. And there was another reason why I started this blog, which I should say. So there was a writing competition,
Okay.
uh, taken part in it, and I had written a story. That the It was an open writing competition, and I couldn't even make it past the first round.
Right.
It was organized by Sulekha.com, which was again a very big destination in those days. So there used to be Rediff and Sulekha,
Okay.
but the places, and Rediff comment thread was basically a very early version of Twitter.
All right.
Um, so I lost, like I couldn't even make it past the first round, and I read the stories that made it past the first round, and I was like, wait, what? My story is much better than these. So I took a decision never again to
Okay.
send in anything to anyone unless it is solicited. I
Right.
actually had that before. If you guys Google, you can still find some of my reviews from 2002 and 2003 on Rediff.
Okay.
So then they had this thing that you could write in your review and they would publish it on Reddit if it was good enough.
Okay.
Now, the advantage that I had was I could watch these movies sometimes before Raja Sen, who was their official reviewer, because I was in the US
Right.
and is it a
Yes.
day before here. So, for instance, Kal Ho Na Ho,
Hmm.
I watched Kal Ho Na Ho before I'm sure pretty much anybody in India did, like a few hours before. So
Yes.
I came 1 o'clock at night and typed the review and sent it in, hoping that Rediff will publish it because I'm the first guy who's written
Yes.
about it.
Yes.
And so I had those articles lying around. I had one on Kal Ho Na Ho, one on Khaki, which
Okay.
I at that time thought was a brilliant movie. Till years later, I found
Right.
I accidentally saw the copy
Okay.
from Assault on Precinct 13. And then I felt miserable for having written that review. Anyway, so I had sent in my reviews before, but after that Sulekha competition, I decided I will never write in anything ever. Whatever I'll write, I'll keep control over it and put it here. If people like it, they'll like it. If they don't, they don't.
Arnab, this month your new novel Shakchunni released,
Hmm?
and I have something over here. I have, am I holding it right? Yes. I have my copy of Shakchunni with me, and I am just starting to read this novel. I cannot wait to read this novel. So could you tell us something about Shakchunni, your new novel? What is starting with what is the Shakchunni? I'll show it once again. Yes.
So Shakchunni um, is a Bengali ghost legend. So Bengali ghost legend, there is almost a universe of Bengali ghosts. And bizarrely, strangely, amusingly, they are a ghost isn't a ghost. So there is a Brahmin ghost, a Brahmodaitya. There is a Muslim ghost, Mamdabhut. There is a generic woman, female ghost, a Petni.
Okay.
And then there's a sub ghost among the Petni class called a Shakchuni. So just this sheer stratification, like even after you die, you carry with you the divisions of when you were alive. I just
Right.
found that amusing and perhaps says a lot about our society, that even a ghost has to be classified by their gender and religion. And this was especially true because I haven't seen that, like, in Western, in the Western fantasy ghost world, a vampire is a vampire, right?
Right, right,
As
right.
there is no remnant of what their community was before they went and became undead. But this,
A Hindu zombie, and a, you know,
yes, there is no difference.
uh, uh,
But strangely, in Bengali lore, there was, and they had very distinctive characteristics. So the Shakchunni was uh, the ghost of a woman who desires the life of a live married woman. So a Shakchuni is somebody who could not enjoy the bliss of marital life when they were alive, and
yeah,
so they want to possess somebody who's happy. Now, I'd read this in Thakurma Jhuli, which was again a Bengali Thakurma Jhuli and Thakur Dada Jhola, which for people of an age, I don't know if people read it any longer, was kind of a rite of passage. Every Bengali read it. So when I had read it, when I read it, or rather I heard it from my grandmother, I obviously was not evolved enough to understand the subtext. So the idea of Shakchunni came when my daughter was born, and we were sitting. There are some YouTube videos, that like YouTube cartoons on the Shakchunni story.
yes, yes.
Ghar motke debo motash. So I was watching it with my daughter when I thought, man, there is subtext to the story that I never understood before. It's actually fairly interesting. So the main thing that stuck with me was somebody who desires the life of another because in a way they cannot be who they are. They don't like, or they hate what they are, and they want somebody else's life. This is really, this to me is something you can write a horror story from.
Right.
So Shakchunni kind of grew out of that idea. So if you read the idea, I'm not going to elaborate on why the story is about this, but once you read it, you'll understand.
Right.
It is so. In the story, the story follows the traditional tropes of the Shakchunni story. There is zamindar, there is a possession, but you realize that there's a very modern take on everything. It is not your Thakurma Juli's Shakchunni.
Right.
And another thing that I always wanted to do, and this gave me the opportunity to do it, was to set. None of my novels are historical. I mean, Sultan of Delhi to an extent is, but it is it straddles different eras. But a good historical novel has to be based on one point of time in history, in my opinion, because that history itself becomes a character. So I've always wanted to write a historical novel,
Okay.
but not the Shorodindu kind of historical
Right.
novel.
Right.
So this is set in late 1940s Bengal, which was an extremely interesting time for Bengali history and what would come to become Bengali politics even today. You might not immediately understand the link between what happens in Bengal today and 1940s Bengal, but it exists. It's quite a lot of it actually. So there was the Bengal famine, which we call Monontor in Bangla. And so this is set amidst the Bengal famine. And it is about a family of zamindars who have fallen upon bad times, but as all zamindars did, at I mean, the system was rotting away. But then once the this is the last hurrah of the zamindari class. So when, and this is true, this is actual history, is that when the British started taking away all the grain from Bengal because they were afraid that the Japanese were going to conquer Bengal because they were coming in from the east. So what they wanted to do was they wanted to do what's known as a scorched earth policy, which is what Stalin did to Hitler. That is how he lost in Russia. So he basically starved his own population to death. He cut off the food supply, and the it was winter there too, so they basically died in the snow, the German army. So that was what the British were. But of course, it comes at a great cost to the local population. So Winston Churchill essentially didn't care. He said so. He doesn't care if Bengalis died. He said they were subhuman anyways. So they were moving the grain away. So it was an artificially caused famine. It's not as if the crops failed. No, the crops
Right.
were taken away. But as it happens, some of the zamindars realized that they don't have to hand over all the crops to the British. They could sell it themselves. So they started running this clandestine market where grain was sold at the cost of gold.
My God.
Um, so they hoarded grain, even though it was illegal, of course. Everything was illegal. So this is a family which has their last hurrah selling grain at a premium. And so they're basically merchants of death in many ways. But as what happens, people don't understand the significance of what they do. They just think, yeah, this is grain. We've always dealt in grain. We're just selling it more expensively than we did. And hey, we are making money. We've always made money. It's not that we ever cared about people anyways. So it's about that family and set amidst Japanese spies who were all over Calcutta in those days. For those of you who have seen the Bomkesh Bokshi movie, you'll
Mm.
uh, people don't read that many books. I think movies are a good reference. It's that kind of there were Japanese spies in Calcutta. The Japanese were bombing Calcutta, so it's all set. These are all things that you will find in the novel. So that's also a fascinating part of the novel. It's the history as well as the subtext of the Shakchunni story.
Arnab, how do you create your main characters of your story? Do they appear fully formed or you create them? All your novels have very memorable characters, be it Rukhsana Ahmed of the Mahabharata murders or Arjun Bhatia, Sultan of Delhi, or even Bengali, or even Nayantara. So how do you create your main characters?
So I love the time I spent thinking and creating my characters. Um, one of the mistakes that many newbie authors often make is to focus purely on the story, because ultimately a novel is a story, right?
Right.
But there are two stories in any novel. One is the sequence of events, and one is the way the characters grow and evolve. So the many people focus on the story part of it, but they don't realize that what makes a book popular or is the characters. As an example, the Marvel universe, right? It's the characters. It's Hulk, Iron Man. The stories, yeah,
Right.
the stories they make any they always do.
Right.
The characters can't change. So the characters are truly the IP of your story. Even though you think the story is the IP, no, it's the characters. So what I do in terms of how do I try to make my characters memorable? Again, there's nothing unique about what I'm going to tell you. Any any person teaching you how to write would tell you the same thing. Is that this character has to move along with the story. The If you look at Hindi movies,
Mm.
commercial. Let's take an example of a Govinda movie. I love Govinda movies, but what's the Govinda character? The character played by Govinda, Raja Babu, usually doesn't change
Right.
throughout the.
Right.
Actually, in Raja Babu it does, but most of they don't focus on that at all. If the character does not change, the characters, whether it is Arjun Bhatia or Nayantara, they have to understand something about themselves and the world around them through the progression of the story. That is what you're aiming for. And once people understand that, those characters are people who live inside you even after you've forgotten what the story is. So, for those of my daughter has read Harry Potter 13 times, so
Mm.
she's memorized it. But I've read Harry Potter only once. And whenever she talks about the stories, most of it I have a very vague recollection of the entire story, but I can't tell you what happened in book number 5, page 300. But I do remember the characters. I do remember not just the characters, but how J.K. Rowling kind of evolves the character of Harry Potter through childhood to adolescence to kind of becoming a young adult. So at the end, the decisions he takes are characteristic of a mature adult. That's what makes him a hero, right? It's nothing else. But at the middle of like in the fourth, fifth book, he becomes a very irritating character, which often happens to kids becoming adults. So J.K. Rowling spent a lot of time. That is not accidental. So, in order, and so Harry Potter, pretty much the most recognizable character, I would say, in the book world today. There is a lot of thought that has gone into making Harry Potter the character, I would say, much more than the story. So, even though I would say, personal opinion, that the last book isn't a particularly great book in terms of story, previous ones are. But nobody will say I didn't like the last book. You can't. Why? Because by that time you care for all the characters. You basically want to see how it ends. So how it ends, you don't really care. You just want to know the fate of the characters. You want closure, because characters, ultimately, that's the way I look at many things, even religion, even everything, as an agnostic. What we are attached to, say, in terms of gods, are the characters, right? It is the characters.
Right.
Ma Durga, if I'm an atheist, the character of Ma Durga, what it signifies for us, that is something worth dying for. Even though I think that Ma Durga exists as a entity, no, but the idea, the character, yes, it is definitely says something emotional to me and to countless others. So there is a story of Ma Durga, but it's the story that creates the character.
Right. Arnab, what influences do you think are there on your writing style? You write in a very well-paced and lucid manner, which is almost cinematic. You can imagine a movie based on the characters of your novels. So, which is there any author or any book that you loved, which you think reflects on your writing?
So this is something which people have criticized my writing on. Um, when a review of Sultan of Delhi came out, I think in Scroll,
Mm,
it starts usually when somebody reviews a TV series, they normally review the TV series, right? Because that's what it says.
mm,
But it starts with me. Their review starts off with me, which is strange. It says that when Sultan of Delhi was written, it basically screamed, "Adapt me," and somebody has adapted it. So first of all, just for those of you who don't know how book writing works, of the millions of books that get written, like a 0.00001% of them make it to screen. So writing a book in order for it to be made into screen is like expecting that when I buy a lottery ticket, it is to win, right? You have a better chance the lottery than having your book made. And we just think about the number of very popular books that have not been made into movies, right? So nobody writes a book in order to pitch it to screen, because if you do, then you're a fool, because it's just not going to happen. The reason why, and my books have been criticized for being very script like, or very like somebody walks in, I describe a setting, they say some things, and it moves to another scene, which
right.
is basically the structure of a screenplay, is my inspiration is movies. That is also true. If somebody asks, would I consider myself to be very well read? No, I wouldn't consider myself to be very well read. When I say very well read, if you have like English, uh, a graduate in English literature, and if we are asked to write down the books we have read, I would possibly have not read as many books as the English lit guy. But if you put me in a room across a person who's done film studies, and you ask us to write down the films, I'm pretty confident I can beat that guy in
Right.
terms of the movie.
Right.
So my influences in story are also cinematic. Now, the question that you might have, why don't you make movies? I wish, I wish I could, uh,
Uh,
but just that with a full-time job, you can't make movies. That is one thing you can't,
right.
because making movies just requires somebody to invest a lot of money in you. A book doesn't require any
Right.
investment, a pre-investment.
Right.
Uh, so the inspiration. So in terms of authors, Satyajit Ray, his Bengali books, because again he comes from cinema, were also very cinematic.
Right.
So again, because it's obvious he's thinking in terms of cinema. It's just that he can't make those as movies, so he writes them as books.
As books.
It's same as me. So Satyajit Ray books, I especially I'm a huge and this has obviously riled up many Bengalis because I've said it publicly. I'm not a big fan of Feluda. Never was. I'm a huge fan of his short stories.
Yeah.
Huge fan. Short stories are masterful, especially his horror ones.
Right.
Amazing. Um, and how he gets it right. So, as an example, there is a story called Ratan Babu o Shei Lokta. It's about this. It's a very short, like 5 or 6 pages. It's about a, 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 a Bengali office goer who goes to the suburbs, and there he encounters somebody who looks exactly like him. And it has a very shocking ending, a very shocking and ambiguous ending, which I loved. Now, it is extremely cinematic, if you read it, you'll just see it you will see the cinema in your head. And so that is the way I write. I write whenever my writing process is that I think of the scene I'm going to write before I write it. Because I have to juggle a lot of balls in terms of my career, I cannot sit in front of the computer and start writing because I would waste too much time. So when I go and in front of the computer, that scene in my head is done. I've basically seen the movie in my head.
All right.
I think of things not in terms of words, but in terms of a movie that plays in my head. So
Okay.
it goes by scene by scene. I usually I know how the book ends, always. Otherwise, I wouldn't start writing a book. So I always do the ending first, and then I walk backwards. I also know here are four main characters. Here is where I want to move them. So I want to start them off as this, and I want them to finish like this. So I have four threads, let's say, of characters and one thread of the story. First thing, story ending, I get done. All the characters, how they're going to end, I get done, and then I walk backwards. Rest of it I fill up as I write. I don't have a very detailed storybook.
Arnab, it has been extremely wonderful talking to you. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.